I think that what we're seeing is Gen Z starting to trend more conservative. Social media is playing a huge role in that.
Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Right here, you're going to find everything you need to know about North Carolina politics and public policy. This time, though, we're going to be talking about what your congressional delegation is doing new in Congress right now. So joining us this week, of course, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation and all of his expert viewpoints on what's going on. And from Carolina Journal, we have CJ's deputy editor, Jeff Moore, joining us, and Carolina Journal's legislative reporter, Brianna Kramer. Okay, let's move right to it. First, you have a new congressional delegation representing North Carolina. And big news for one of them, Virginia Foxx, the new rules chairman. I mean, that's a big, big job. Mitch, tell me, why is that such an important thing?
It's a significant job at both the congressional level and also at the legislative level for folks who pay attention to what's going on here, because the rules chair basically kind of helps set the agenda of what's going to happen.
Right.
And say, okay, we're going to deal with this. We're not going to deal with this. This is the amount of time we're going to spend on this issue. This is how we're going to handle the flow of legislation. And when you have hundreds of different bills and lots of different priorities, even bigger in Congress than it is in the legislature, where you're dealing with 435 different people, having one person who kind of says, all right, I'm the traffic cop, that's a big deal. And having Virginia Foxx in that role, I think, is going to be significant. Virginia Foxx is tough. You might remember she was in the news fairly recently for falling down the stairs at the Capitol. And someone asked her how she was. She said, well, I'm from Western North Carolina. I'm tougher than a $2 steak. And I think people would agree with that. That's going to be a very significant role for someone who's now been in our delegation for a number of years.
Sure. It is a powerful role. Now, before this, she was, of course, education and workforce. Jeff, you and I have both interviewed her, worked with her over the last several years. She does not play around. Now, if you're going to have an air traffic controller for legislation on the Hill, this is a good one to have.
Yeah, I can't think of a better traffic cop in this kind of role than her. She's endearing, but no nonsense, and has a lot of old-fashioned sayings, and things that really drive home a lot of toughness that you need in this role as rules chairman. So happy to see her as part of that leadership delegation.
Absolutely. Now, we have a lot of other things going on right now from your congressional delegation. Brianna, you're really keeping track of this. What are our representatives doing as they kind of get their feet wet, digging into the Hill? Yeah,
so now that Republicans hold a majority in both the House and Senate, they are pushing through a string of different border bills right now. So just this week, the House passed the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. That just passed. All Republicans were in favor of it, along with 2 Democrats voted for it, and then the rest against it. But interestingly, for North Carolina voters, Representative Don Davis of Congressional District 1, he was the only one to vote present, so he didn't really give a side, one or the other, on this bill. And this is really just to clarify Title IX and gender in sports, and so Republicans are wanting to make that clear that biology is an important factor, and when you're in school sports and different athletics programs, it comes down to your sex and biology and not how you identify. So that's the main premise of that bill, and Davis was the only one to vote present on that one. And then there's a couple other ones they're working on as well in terms of illegal immigration and the southern border. One of them would deport illegal immigrants convicted of sex crimes. That's actually being discussed today on Capitol Hill. And then the other one, Chuck Edwards is pushing a bill to disqualify non-citizens from voting or from actually having an impact in the congressional representation. So that is very interesting because it has to do with the census and how many states or how many electoral college votes every state would get. So definitely a lot going on right now.
A lot going on, absolutely. Let's talk about Chuck Edwards' bill. This is the second time he's put it through. What does this do?
Yeah, so this would ask a critical question on the census forms, whether or not you are a United States citizen. As far as the apportionment that we have, as far as the constitutional framework for getting representation and how many representatives you have, you'll remember that North Carolina gained seats in this latest census. and grew our portion of the Congress. But for states that have really high illegal immigrant populations, that census is counting non-citizens as well because it's not asking that critical question.
Right.
Then those numbers are getting apportioned in a state like California, which may have a huge illegal immigrant population, will have more seats in Congress and therefore more influence on Capitol Hill because of an illegal immigrant population they have there. So this would put that critical question on the form. Those non-citizens would not be counted as far as the apportionment goes for congressional seats. So the influence of non-citizens in the United States Congress, as Chuck Edwards put it, Representative Edwards put it, would not be as high as it currently is because we don't have that question on the form.
Sure, sure. Do you think there's an appetite for this kind of legislation in this new Congress?
Yeah, I think so. We've seen that some of these immigration and border issues kind of cut across the partisan divide to a large degree. Obviously, President Trump has been big on securing the southern border and tackling illegal immigration. So I think you have some pretty wide consensus support for getting this question on the census and therefore having the downstream effect of reducing the influence of non-citizens on the congressional plane.
Sure, sure. I'm going to actually jump right back to the Don Davis thing. Why vote present? That's the part. You know, why not say yes or no?
Well, you'd think you'd want to take a stand one way or the other,
Right.
but I think Don Davis has been kind of hurt before by his willingness to cross party lines. If you remember, before he joined Congress, he was a state senator, and he was the only Democratic state senator way back in 2019 when Republicans did not have a veto-proof supermajority, so they needed help from Democrats to be able to pass legislation over then Governor Roy Cooper's veto. Davis was the only Democrat to vote along with the Republicans on this Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act, basically saying that if a child survives a botched abortion, you're not going to kill it. And he was with Republicans on that, but after that vote, he was excoriated by the Democratic Party. They really trashed him. They set up a whole website about disloyal Democrats, and he was the only one on it. Right. And so he probably remembers that and did not want to cross his Democratic colleagues, even though he doesn't agree with them on this issue.
Sure, very interesting because, you know, with this women's sports, this has been a big issue for North Carolina specifically. And, you know, Davis has been in that, you know, now that he's in that congressional District 1 area, which may vote Democrat but be a little more conservative, he's really, you think, paying attention to his constituency?
I think he certainly is,
Sure.
and it probably is also his personal view. I mean, I would guess, based on his vote on that Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act, that he probably trends a little bit more socially, culturally conservative than today's Democratic Party. But he also knows if he wants to continue support among Democrats, he can't be too far away from them. And if he wants to win in that district, which can go either way, and we saw his re-election bid was very close. It was the only hotly contested congressional race in North Carolina, that he can't be too far left. He can't have people seeing him as a New York, New England liberal. He's got to be, if he's going to be a Democrat, he's got to be one who will still fit in down home in eastern North Carolina.
Right. Well, you know what they say about squirrels who try and stay in the middle of the road. That makes me a little nervous for him, of course. Now, one of the things that we've talked about is the Lumbee bill. Tell me a little bit about what this means and whether you think the Lumbees are going to finally get recognition as an Indian tribe.
Yeah, so today, a newly elected freshman Congressman Mark Harris is going to reintroduce with Representative David Rouser the Lumbee Tribal Act. Or, no, I'm sorry, the Lumbee Fairness Act, so which would give full federal recognition to the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, and along with that, all the federal services and benefits that come with it. So they actually introduced this act, Rouser did, last Congress in December. It passed the House with a wide bipartisan margin of support, but then it was on the campaign trail that President Trump indicated his support for the bill. It's not been able to get all the way to the president's desk. They passed the House, but Trump on the campaign trail said that he was excited to sign an act that would give full federal recognition to the Lumbee tribe. He's reiterated that support, and of course he's going to be swearing in next week into the White House and taking that role. So they're hopeful that they'll get it signed, and this would be a big boon for the Lumbee tribe, obviously, but Mark Harris in that district, it's right there in the heart of his district in Robeson County. They've got one of the highest poverty rates in the state. You get a lot of federal benefits that go along with this that could help with anything from education to economic development. So this is one of his first acts as a congressman in Congress trying to kind of bring home the bacon, so to speak, for the Lumbee tribe, which has seen a very acute switch in allegiances politically over the past several years, flipping from generally Democrat support and over the Trump years to a very firm red Trump supporting voting base there in southeastern North Carolina.
So this is a powerful first move for Harris as he tries to really lock down
his
his
he's really
constituency.
sending a signal to his constituents and to one of those core constituencies which has been so politically powerful over these past couple of cycles. I think Robeson County was one of the first community centers that the Republican National Committee set up, and they're setting up these kind of minority outreach centers. It was the first one that they launched, and it was one of the most successful centers that they had during that campaign cycle in 22 and then again in 24. So a lot of this is going to be politically advantageous for him to kind of share the love back towards that voting bloc and give a signal that he's all about taking care of his constituency that he has there in the 7th District.
It'd be really interesting if the Lumbee tribe becomes one of the first first signatures they get from President Trump.
Yeah, it certainly will be, and he's cheered on it in his rallies in that region and gotten a lot of cheers in response to that. It's kind of a nuanced issue a lot of people don't know about. Of course, the Lumbee tribe is very tuned into that, and we've got some North Carolina House representatives that are part of the Lumbee tribe, Jared Lowry, that's very tuned into this as well and has spoken with Trump on this issue, so they're hopeful to get it across the finish line this time.
And remember, opposition to this stuff has generally not come from the general public. It's come from other Indian tribes who don't want anyone else getting in on their deal. And so the Lumbees have been trying for this for a number of years, and it's been the more established tribes who've been the main voices against giving recognition to the Lumbees. It isn't the general public saying anything bad about it.
Very interesting. And east of 95 is really sort of Trump's sweet spot in North Carolina, and North Carolina was such a critical part of this past election.
Yeah, for sure, and the Lumbee have been a big part of that. So they've fallen right in line with some of those political transitions, and then some of the more generally conservative populations in eastern North Carolina, for sure.
Elections are really won in neighborhoods. I mean, that's what I think we're learning with some of this. Very interesting. Now, we've talked a lot about legislation and all the things that have been moving parts, but really, let's look at the broader scope. You had a great story on CarolinaJournal.com about trends among Gen Z voters. That didn't really cover the three of us, but certainly covers you.
That's right.
Tell me about what you found and what you're seeing, actually, in your sort of Gen Z community and voter base.
Well, yeah, now that the 2024 election has passed, it's come and gone, we thought it would be interesting just to look at the numbers. How is the electorate here in North Carolina changing? How has it changed from 2020 to 2024, especially in this Gen Z age group? So that's 18 to 25-year-olds is what we were looking at on the State Board of Elections website. And what we found is that Republican registrations in this group have gone up by about, I think, 10,000 young Republican voters, which is very interesting. And a lot of that is made up of men. I think 17,000 young men and then 5,000 young women. And that's net gain of 10,000 because then you also had a drop of undisclosed voters. So all in all, within 4 years, they had a 10,000 increase. And then we looked at the Democrats in this Gen Z age group, and they had a 39,000 decrease of registrations. So just really interesting to look at those numbers and see what is happening here in North Carolina with young voters, and that there is a shift going on in terms of like how they're identifying politically and what their views are. So I think that what we're seeing is Gen Z starting to trend more conservative. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the years ahead as high schoolers, Gen Alpha rises up.
I mean, now
soon
Beta's being born, I think.
Right,
I'm not sure that's one label I'd want.
That's true. But yeah, it's just interesting to think about what could be causing this shift to take place, because a lot of times people just assume the youngest voters are more left-leaning. But seeing this change, starts to make you wonder what has changed maybe in the media landscape, for instance. There's a lot of factors that could be playing into it.
But what do you think?
I think the way that young people are consuming media and your different alternative sources now, we don't just sit down and watch the nightly news or cable anymore. It's really almost going to be, I think, a thing of the past. And so I think social media is playing a huge role in that. And we know young voters and young adults are on Snapchat and TikTok. Who knows how much longer that will be accessible, but Instagram. So they're able to get a variety of different perspectives and actually tune more into what they're interested in, whether that's a good thing or not. Definitely just opening up their availability to other perspectives that, rather than just mainstream media, and with podcasts as well. I think we were discussing how that can play a role. Just talking about Joe Rogan and these huge influencers that have a huge base of men, young men, following them as well.
Beyond the media, I'm thinking that people in your age group are also the ones who probably had the hardest hit, because it happened at such a critical time, from COVID and what government did about COVID. I mean, those of us who are older, it was an inconvenience, but we had lived 30, 40, 50 years of our lives before it happened. But this was happening for people in your age group right when you're going through school, you're starting your adult life, and all of a sudden you get hit with the government saying you can't do this, you can't do that.
The cost was so high for that age group.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's just the economy and inflation, and seeing this firsthand for high school students and college students, the lockdowns like you mentioned, and mask mandates, and then now just seeing the cost of everything go up as we're growing up and trying to, buy a house or whatever, buy a car, and you're seeing the cost go up as well. So yeah, I think definitely just what we've lived through in the last 5-10 years or so has had a big impact as well.
The suspicion of government. I mean, that's the leftover. That's a side effect of COVID, certainly.
Yeah. And if you think of like 18 to 25, if you go back to 2020 when COVID first emerged. So if you're 20 years old and go back 5, they're 15, 16 years old right there in their formative years of their life, and they're going on lockdown. They're seeing all this kind of fires everywhere start between COVID. After COVID started, then we had the summer after the George Floyd incident and the riots that followed then, and then you have the election in 2020, and then you have January 6th in 2021, and then everything that goes from there. So if you think about the experiences that they've actually had, sometimes when we look at it politically, we break down the demographic groups, it's like these are the young voters, they're going to be more liberal. We don't necessarily think about these are actually separate people in this age cohort now that have had separate experiences coming through that are going to shape things politically for them a lot differently. And then the things that they have access to. We saw that the Trump campaign in particular put a lot of emphasis on reaching those younger voters and going to those alternative sources of media. He did a kind of a podcast gauntlet there in the last several weeks.
And they had J.D. Vance doing Theo Vaughn and all these other ones.
Made huge splashes in all those alternative media and really accessed a lot of those people. So I'm not sure that shaped that younger generation as much as the younger generation's kind of acceptance and desire to get some of that is shaping it in reverse as well. So.
Even memes.
Plus remember, some of this is cyclical too. I mean, you and I remember one of the huge shows on TV when we were teenagers was Family Ties, which was all about two old hippies who were sad because their son was this Reagan conservative.
And he's the one I liked.
Exactly. He's the one that people liked, and Michael J. Fox wasn't actually conservative, but that was the basis of the show, that these hippies from the 60s were growing up and their kids were being conservative, and so their kids were probably more liberal, and now you're seeing their kids being more conservative. It's all cyclical to some extent, but as Brianna was pointing out, there are some key things that have happened for that group and changes in our lives that probably do make things a little bit different in terms of their approach.
So if this TikTok ban happens, that is a major news source for that age group. I mean, it's able to simplify a very complex issue, oversimplify a very complex issue into a few memes and a few sentences. Does that mean, do you think YouTube becomes even more powerful than it is? But that's a longer format for news. Things like this right here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think younger people are gravitating towards those 10 to 20 second snippets of quick information. Whether that's a good thing or not, that our attention span is so low now. But yeah, I don't think people are just going to watch the long video forms on YouTube. I think YouTube is even doing the short.
Except this show.
Yeah.
We'll get some snippets out of this.
Right. Yeah.
I think even on YouTube they now have like the little what do they call them, like YouTube Reels or YouTube snippets, whatever.
Very interesting.
So yeah, I think that's really important. And TikTok, yeah, that would be huge if that actually is banned, because I know like my brother and so many people get their information on TikTok, and they get really interesting ideas that aren't being talked about anywhere else on TikTok. So it is kind of valuable in a way.
A lot of Western North Carolina stuff came through there, good and bad.
Yeah.
Very interesting. All right, before we wrap up, because we want to keep it short, right? Give me an update on the Riggs-Griffin saga ongoing.
Yes, indeed. This election still is not over and won't really be over probably until at earliest the end of January, beginning of February. The latest developments this week are court filings at both the state Supreme Court and the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The reason being that Griffin would like this to be, the Republican candidate Jefferson Griffin would like all of this to be determined by the state courts, whereas Allison Riggs, the Democrat, the State Board of Elections, Democratic Party, and some activist groups working with Mark Elias all want the federal courts to deal with this issue. Among the court filings, most of which said Griffin should win or Riggs should win, probably the most interesting thing was that Griffin is saying to the state Supreme Court, hey, if you agree with me that there's some concern about some of the ballots that were cast this time around, you don't have to go straight to the 60,000 people who registered to vote without providing driver's license number or the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. He's been getting pretty much hammered about targeting those voters. He said instead, you could focus first on the 5,500 voters who cast ballots from overseas without providing photo ID, even though everyone else had to. And he's saying if you just focused on those alone and threw those ballots out, I'd probably win. You wouldn't have to address anything else. It'll be interesting to see if the state Supreme Court buys that argument and goes forward with it.
All right, you'll be able to find all the updates on that coming at carolinajournal.com, plus all the other news stories that we've covered and lots of analysis. Thanks so much for joining us.